Hello, welcome back to the show. Today I interview my friend Krista West. Krista is the CEO of Studio West Design Co., a creative agency handling everything you can imagine in the marketing and advertising space, everything from funnel builds, email marketing, social media, design, graphics, branding, everything. And she has built this business into multiple seven figures over the last 5 years while having young kids. And she is currently pregnant with her third child. And so we have a great conversation about how she has established boundaries in her business, how she's really prioritized dropping off and picking up her kids from childcare so that she's fitting in this big business in the hours of that she has of childcare every day, and how important that is to her, and how that structure and those boundaries are just communicated to clients from the very beginning. And then we get into a talk about resilience and overcoming hard things as a leader of a business and as a mother, and how motherhood really trains resilience into us. And Krista goes into how she's really in the practice right now of prioritizing her self-care and her needs in order to prepare for her third baby here, and how she'll be managing maternity leave. So without further ado, welcome back to the show. Hi, Krista. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Linz. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I'm really excited. We've had to postpone this conversation a few times for different child-related reasons, obviously, working moms. But I'm excited to dig in with you. And we were just talking before we hit record. Krista is a wealth of information on running a big business with a remote team and balancing it all in the limited hours of childcare, you know, which every time I see that you're picking your daughter up at 3:00, I'm like, how did you get it all done by 3? So I'm really excited to see how you've built the rhythm in your life and all of that. But before we jump in, can we start with just a little bit of your background, how you ended up running an agency like you do and doing it all with young kids?
Yeah, totally. So my background is I went to school for entrepreneurship. I started my first business actually at 17, and then sold kind of what I had from that after college, just getting rid of inventory essentially. I did digital marketing essentially for a high-end flea market in Cleveland, Ohio, which is where I'm from. I now live in Helena, Montana, so people find that as a very big surprise, but my husband's from here and he's an engineer here. So I moved here about 5 years ago now almost, and I started the agency after I left my role as the marketing director of the Cleveland Flea. And essentially, I was really looking for something at the time that allowed me the flexibility to be a mom and also, you know, grow something from the ground up. I always say I've never been the best employee. And so that was pretty noticeable in my role that I had. And so I started just, you know, really building it off of clients, people that I knew. I just started within my network, and I have grown the agency in the last under 5 years to be a 7-figure business. We have a fully remote woman-led team, which is amazing. And a lot of our team members are also moms. So that's a huge driver for me. Is I think when I started out, I didn't really have a vision for this. I was just like, I'm just going to support my family and I'm going to be able to be a mom and, do what I love to do. And so essentially, as it grew, a big passion of mine was inspiring and allowing other mothers within this space to know that they can still have a career. Because I think that's the first question that comes to mind when you're in the newborn phase. You're like, how do I do this and that? So I just really wanted to build off of that. And essentially, here we are. We're a full service digital marketing agency. I did not go to school for graphic design or anything of that sort, obviously. So everything I know is kind of self-taught. And then my team has been trained by myself. So we don't offer anything within the agency that I personally don't know how to do. made that mistake before and I learned from it very quickly. Everything that our team does has been trained by myself, or we've done trainings collectively together. And we service clients actually globally at this point. So we have nationwide clients, but then we also have a few clients that we service overseas. And essentially what it means to be a full service digital marketing team is we do everything in the digital space. So everything from branding to graphic design, web design. And then we also do social media management, social media strategy, email marketing, SMS marketing, funnel building, SEO, coding. We do tech and app managements and builds and campaigns, and we have great production partners and things like that. So I always tell people, like, really anything that you see that happens business-wise in the digital space, our team can execute. And we've grown to be that, right? Like, we do paid media, and that's something that we have grown within our agency and kind of built our team up to do. So they weren't all things that we originally knew how to do and launched with. I originally was just a design studio that was really focusing on brands and bringing them to life via branding and web. And that is our bread and butter. Like, we do the most of that still just because we're known for it. We do everything customized, and it's fully different than maybe another agency would do. But I like to be the one-stop shop and I like to kind of have our hands in everything. So we do have some of those clients that we support in a full service way. So it's kind of a little bit about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I've worked with you. You've built a couple brands for me, and there's several things that I love about working with an all women team, but especially a mama led team. And one of the reasons I was so excited for this conversation is because even initially working with you, you really set an expectation up front. Like, this is how we work. These are the expectations we have of you. This is the expectations you can have of us. And, here's how we will communicate. Here's how the processes go. And knowing you, I know you told me, like, I had to put those processes in place. And I did that really intentionally to protect my structure and my schedule, not only because we're a remote team and I want to know what everybody's doing and I want to know how to do what everybody's doing, but I'm a mother and I want the business to not feel out of control, right? And I don't want to be so available to people. I want to be able to give people an expectation that between these hours and these hours I'm working, and otherwise I'm with my kids. I can't really help you unless it's launch mode or an emergency, right? So because I know you and going in, I had those expectations set. I was kind of on the inside of why, but can you talk a little bit about, like, did you start out without those kind of boundaries? And I know in the marketing world and in business ownership in general, boundaries with clients can be one of the most challenging things because you want to make people happy and you're helping run other people's businesses, which I know is triggering, right? Like, people are like, oh my God, something's wrong. It needs fixed right now. And often that doesn't match up to family schedules or needing to pick kids up at a certain time. So how did you learn that as you go? Did you do that intentionally from the beginning? And what are some of the reactions people have had to having such boundaries in your business?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we didn't start like this. I will say I had a team member that came in a couple years ago, and she's now no longer with our team, but I still give her credit to this day because she substantially changed our processes and just the way we operate. And it was at the exact right time too. We were kind of operating where we would just like do anything all the time, and we were kind of all over the place. And it worked for a while until we were really at that phase of like scale and growth. And it's like, if we continue at this capacity, it's just not going to be feasible. And so she came in and really overhauled our processes from an operations standpoint and started to put some structure in place. We then had a lawyer come in and like overhaul our contracts and have some nitty-gritty conversations there on like expectations and boundaries with clients. And so it was a learning curve for me, to say the least. And there are still times where I fall back into my old ways. Like, I have a client that has different expectations and I'm like, frantically trying to meet those. And so even not just process wise, like it's taken me a lot of internal work to be like, okay, this is how we're going to do it. And here's why. I work with a coach, I have a therapist, and there are conversations, that come up regularly about setting boundaries and keeping them, and, clients having issues with them. I think overall, the way we really started to run the agency is we kind of set expectations clear from the beginning. And I don't necessarily tell our clients why. I'm kind of just like, this is how we're going to do it. And, hope this works for you. And in most cases it does, right? But it allows us to have flexibility in our lives. And I think for us, especially as a team of high performers, creatives, people who are working digitally, a lot of which who are working from home, right? I just got an office this year, but I used to work from home. And the reason I transitioned out of that phase is I just never was able to turn it off. Overall, it's you have to set a boundary. We went through COVID, and it's boundaries of time didn't exist in the workplace, for anybody, our clients included. And so we did go through that period of we were working at all times. Clients expected that. We kind of fell into that trap, and we did have to inch our way out of that and set new expectations. And it wasn't the easiest thing to do. There were some people who were upset, and I even, to this day, I still get people kind of pushing back in the sense of there's an emergency, or this needs to be done immediately, or, those kind of things. And overall, I think it's just really flipping the script for myself and for my team to say, here's why it can feel like an emergency for our clients. And here's why we're not going to believe that to be true. And we're actually just going to set the expectation differently, and we'll get it done as soon as we can. But that doesn't mean we're going to log on at 9 p.m. at night and fix something. So it's taken us time to get here. And even, I have a team member who's been with me from the start. She's my right hand. I trained her on everything that I know. She's a mini me. It's been amazing to see her grow, and I see her going through periods of growth that I've already went through, right? It's exact moments in time and exact learnings that I've been there, I've done that, from clients to also team, having to overcome things as a leader. And so I see her struggle sometimes with the boundaries, that we set, and clients trying to push the envelope. And I allow her some grace because I still struggle with it myself. But I think overarching, it's my goal is to be able to do this and also mother. I drop my kids off every single day, and I pick them up pretty much every single day. There are days that my husband comes in and fills in the blanks for that. And we've made a healthy kind of communication happen about that when I'm busy or we have a launch or something big is happening. But that's a priority of mine. And I got out of that for a while. I was in a very unhealthy balance of work and motherhood, and very heavy in the workplace. And as soon as I kind of took a step back and I had some big changes happen within our business and my life, I was able to remind myself hey, why did I start this again? What really was the point of this? Because right now this isn't feeding into what I feel the reason I built this was. Those moments allow me to kind of recalibrate and be okay, this isn't working and some things need to change. Either a client needs to go, a process needs to get put in, or, something needs to happen. And so it's an ever evolving structure that we've built, but we definitely, people always say when they come in, they're you're so organized, everything is kind of your expectations are set from the start. And the reason truly goes hats off to the employee that I had. Her name was Lindsay, and she was our project manager. She also clearly did a lot of operations building for us, and she really set this up for us to succeed. And so it allowed us to scale quickly. Once we set those in place, I saw our business go from, an early to mid 6-figure business, and we were able to scale to a 7-figure quickly. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what I love you said is like, I did this so that I could also mother. And I think a lot of what we encounter is we get into what you're talking about. We get into the habit of rushing and the pattern of rushing. And then we become mothers or responding to urgency, rushing, like being so available to everybody, that feeling of like pace not being in our control. And then we become mothers and realize like, I've got little kids that are demanding of my time. I cannot have clients that are demanding of my time, but I'm also beholden to these clients because they're paying the bills, and it becomes the cycle of burnout or the cycle of like, I get the kids down at 8:00 and then I'm up for another 4 hours getting to things that I didn't get to during the day. And like you said, there's seasons for that, but also that's a recipe for lack of sustainability as a mother in a business, if that's your operating system, right? So you have 2 kids right now. I know you're pregnant with your third. We were just talking about that before we hopped on. In this season of life now, where you're at today with young kids, expecting a third, you've established this really successful business and you have really great boundaries with it. Do you feel like the pace and everything is in a place where it's good? Do you feel like there's things that are, you're looking ahead to a third child going, holy crap, there's still work to be done on how to run and grow a business, adding another child and a new system into the system, How are you feeling like, as we sit here today with the business as successful as it is and your motherhood pretty established, looking at adding another child, like what's next in terms of refining the systems you're talking about and leading your team? Like where is your head at looking ahead at the transition you're about to make?
Yeah, I think ultimately everybody feels more worried than I personally am about it, which is always kind of a funny place to be. Everybody's like, what are you going to do? Is it okay? What's your maternity leave going to look like? They're like, you're running a very successful business, kind of like you're at the top and spearheading this. And I think, when I first found out I was pregnant, I went through a pretty big transition pretty quickly in that phase of this year, which was, I lost my business partner and she was poached by our largest client. And so that was a huge undertaking emotionally and just transition for myself and our team. And I panicked a little bit then because I knew I was pregnant at that time. And I was like, okay, this is like rocking the boat a bit. And, my previous maternity leave, I took 4 weeks and she was here to support in that as a second leader for our team. And I was able to come back from that maternity leave really as like the CEO. And so as we had her transition out, which was pretty quickly, I quickly fell out of the CEO role and back into kind of like an executor phase. And something for me, I mentioned I do a lot of coaching with coaches and I have a coach of my own. I go through different periods where I know that I need a different coach for, maybe something specifically that I'm going through in my life. And I have a coach that I've been working on really recalibrating the relationship that I have with myself, ironically, during this entire time. But I got out of a phase of trusting myself and I had this really unhealthy view of like, oh, well, I don't take good care of myself, right? And that was like the mindset that I kind of built. And so I've been working with her a lot to kind of restructure that. And I feel like we've gotten into a really good place where, I make commitments to myself and I've started to keep them. What used to happen is I'd make a commitment to myself and it would fall like the last thing on the list, right? And if somebody else's request came up, I would just replace their request with my commitment. So I was never following through on things like if I wanted to do something for myself or, just really anything. And I've also started to accept like more of the pace. Like I think society has these kind of like boxes that they want us to fit into of like, you should be only spending this much time at work versus being a mom, or you can only work 9 to 5 and then you have to log off, or whatever it is. And I think for me, I've started to become more accepting of, this is who I am. I am a high performer. I love to work. I go through periods where I work really hard and I will wake up, really early and get work done. And I will stay up after the kids go to bed and get things done, But I only allow that to be a phase because I know it's not sustainable. And so that's something, like you mentioned, is like, you can't sustain that forever. And so for me, it's like, okay, I know when I'm going through a high performing phase where there's a lot going on for clients and I have to show up in a big way for clients, for my team. When we went through this transition at the beginning of the year, it was kind of just like, okay, like this is a big moment for me and I get to choose how I'm going to show up right now. On the backside of that, I did cry in bed for like a whole week and do all the emotional stuff that I needed to do. But on the front end of that, that's not the leader I showed up as. But I did allow myself that space. And so I think as I'm like going into this third pregnancy and, people are asking me the standard questions of like, how much time are you going to take off? Like, what's it going to look like? I keep saying, I'm like, I don't really know. You figure it out as you go. And I think that's a huge part of motherhood is like, we can only control so much. And you learn that very quickly as a mom. And I'm a very controlling person. So like, I like to have control. And I accept that about myself. But I think there are things that you just have to kind of be okay with going with the flow with. And so this new like phase of my life and business, I'm okay saying like, hey, I'm going to try to take 2 weeks off. That's kind of where I'm setting the boundary for myself. And that's not normal either, right? People are like, 2 weeks, that's not enough time. I'm like, yeah, but maybe that's enough time for me. And I can start stepping back in, and everybody's like motherhood journey can look different. And I think that's something that we haven't fully accepted yet. Especially for high performers, we kind of put this like boundary on people of like, you shouldn't work that much, or people always say like, don't work too hard, or that's a common thing I hear from people. And I used to be so hard on myself of like, oh, I don't take care of myself, or I always come last. And the reality is I was just allowing others' expectations of like the leader that I should be and the mom that I should be to really affect how I was showing up in every sense. Yeah. So for this phase, ultimately, I'm like, I'm just going to see how it goes. And I'm also stacking my team, to feel fully supported. Like we're in a hiring phase right now. I'm bringing in some really amazing people as support. And also, I always say this, but like my biggest accomplishment in business is my team. Like I have the best team and I will argue that all day long. Like I truly do. And so I know that they are not only going to be set up for success by me, but they know what to do. Like like I said, there are some of them who have been with me from the start. Like, and I'm a very transparent leader. Like when we go through hard times, team wise and client wise, like I'm like, okay, guys, here's what's happening and here's how I'm handling it. And here's what's going on. And so they have that like knowledge of knowing like, okay, here's like how Krista would handle it. And like, I'm not dying, right? Like they can give me a phone call like if there's something going on. So I think ultimately I'm kind of just going to see how it goes. Like you can plan so much and then you have to just kind of like let the horse loose.
Yeah. Well, and I think what you said, like you're learning to not let yourself off the hook when you say you're going to do something for yourself and then you let that fall by the wayside. Like practicing the muscle of prioritizing yourself means that like you don't have to go into every transition in the business like or in life having another kid as an example in this all or nothing mindset, right? It's like I can I can be back to work in 2 weeks because it's not all or nothing. Like, doesn't mean I'm going to work 40 hours. It means that I'm going to open my laptop while I'm feeding or while the baby's napping. And I'm going to sit here on the couch with a show on with a newborn and answer some Slack messages and read an email or two and prep a proposal to go out. Like, that doesn't have to feel like I'm getting dressed, I'm leaving the house. Like, it doesn't have to be such a big deal. And if you are really sticking to the practice that you're talking about around, I'm also saying to myself, I'm doing my self-care rituals, I'm getting asleep, I'm asking for support, I have delegated well, like I'm following through on all these commitments I'm making to myself to take care of myself first, then I feel like that's where these two pieces come together and you go, hey, no, I am prioritizing myself. I am really taking care of my body so it can heal. I'm eating nourishing foods. My partner is supporting me with sleep, and that allows me to come back into the business 2 weeks after giving birth and do 5 hours a week or 10 hours a week.
Yeah.
And it's not this like rigid, controlled, like you're off of maternity leave now, Krista, 2 weeks later. It doesn't have to feel so black and white. And I agree with you that I think a lot of us go into maternity leave as entrepreneurs with this idea that it, like, any amount of communication or touching the business means like we're back. And I don't think it has to feel that way. It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And yet we take the all or nothing approach because that's what's modeled for us out in like the corporate world, right? Like, if you're on maternity leave from your corporate job, you basically can be offline, right? And most entrepreneurs don't have that luxury for even 2 weeks. I mean, to be very, very honest, right? Like, most of us who own our own businesses, we might have spectacular teams like you have. We might have plenty of money in the bank to support us. We don't have to be selling anything right now, but we can't let an inbox or a Slack channel just fester for weeks and weeks and weeks. Like, we have to touch base. And I think that is a little controversial because I think so much of what people are like judging us about is, your business isn't profitable or sustainable if you have to come right back to work. And it's like, well, no, it might be like you said, I want to work. And part of who makes me me and makes me feel like myself after having a baby is the part of me that touches base with my team, sends out a proposal or two, looks at some designs. Like, that makes me feel like Krista, not just like mom who just had a baby who's sitting on the couch all day. And I think it's an important thing to be really transparent about, because it is a place where we receive a lot of judgment from people who don't think like we do or don't own businesses. And they're like, how are you back so fast? You're like, well, back is I'm sitting on my couch with a newborn and I'm doing some email, like I'm not getting dressed, driving to work and spending 9 hours away from the home. Like it sounds like, so I appreciate your transparency. And I think it's such a nuance that we talk about a lot of motherload around, like, if I'm putting myself first and I'm really prioritizing that practice of knowing what I need and making sure that happens, I can go do all these other things that seem impossible or seem crazy from the outside, but my alignment is in place. Therefore, I'm okay. I think that is such an important piece of any part of motherhood and business. It's like, as long as you're okay, I say this all the time, like, if you're okay, all the things, like, then the business will be okay. The babies will be okay. Your relationship will be okay. If you're not okay and you're doing what you and I both have a habit of doing, of like filling time that should be for ourselves with work, then stuff starts to fall apart. Right. So one of the things you talked about was, navigating transition. I'm going to take a left turn a little bit, navigating transition in business for you, it was a business partner and you were pretty, transparent about it on social media and really shared the grief you had to go through in that big transition in your business. But you also just said, I showed up as the leader I needed to be through a really, really rough personal thing. Like, it was a very rough personal experience, but the business could handle it, right? The business could weather it. So can you talk a little bit about like how you approached that? And the nuance I'm getting at is like, I think mothers have this resilience to us where shit like this can blow up and it can happen. Like, you were days pregnant, right? Like, so you were also in this flood of hormones and you're in a little bit of the anxiety of like, oh my God, what does this mean? And you dealt with it, like you felt your feelings, you were transparent about your feelings, and you led your team through it. You never let it be something that was an excuse to fall apart or to make, to radically change anything, right? It was like, hey, this is happening for a reason and I'm going to show up. So I want to get at two things. One is, what did you externally do to lead your team through a massive transition? And two, what did you do to ready yourself to be not, I know you didn't know it was coming, but like, what practices do you have that you could show up so resilient? Because
you were so open about it as it happened. And you were very real with how much grief it was you were experiencing with it and how much emotion. And I was like, damn, I DM'd you, I was like, holy shit, Krista, like this is huge. And like, I worked with you guys, so I know, and I'm like, this is massive for you to be going through this. And like, you're a fucking rock star. Like in the way that you handled it with real depth, like you didn't gloss over it. You didn't make it like the universe. Oh, this just happened for a reason. Like you were like, this really fucking sucks. I hate that I'm going through this. I hate that this is how it happened and it hurts. And here we go. Like we're going to make our way through it. So what are some of your resilience practices that made you be able to weather it? And then what did you have to do to like show up for your team, show up for yourself while you were going through that?
Yeah. So I think on my end, and I've said this, like I'm a pretty transparent leader in my space. And so the first couple of days, like I showed up in transparency, like with tears, like kind of just like breaking down, like, hey, this is really hard for me personally. And here's like what we're going to do. I'm like a huge planner. And so, and like I said, kind of a control freak. My husband would probably agree. And so I ultimately was like, this is, what we're going to do. The day after I found out, I showed up at my office at 5:30 in the morning. And I said, okay, here's like, I'm going to make a plan. Like, here's what's going to happen. Here's how we're going to transition. And we did that within the first week of, me finding out about all of this. And I did show up to my team, in tears at moments and, just allowing them to see that I was emotionally kind of dealing with this in a big way. I think in other moments I would have tried to, kind of like push those emotions down and be like, I'm just gonna power through and lead through this. And that's never really worked out very well for me. And so I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna feel this. And I'm also going to decide to show up for my business and my team, because ultimately, and I say this a lot, like, we don't have another choice, right? Like, in my opinion, like, it's either I choose to like power through this and like, I'm going to be emotional and this is going to be hard and I'm going to show up as a leader, or I'm not. And the I'm not, like, for me just wasn't, I didn't want that. You can kind of like visualize what those different options in your life would look like. And I was just like, this is not a moment for me that I'm going to choose to not show up. And so ultimately, the biggest thing for resilience was being pretty transparent with my team, with my family, my friends, my husband, of like every day, like kind of how I was feeling, and allowing myself to like really mourn, the hardship and the loss that I was like undertaking. It was like, it felt like it was like a break. I mean, she was also like one of my closest friends, right? So it was like a breakup. I felt like I was going through, and, you go through the photos, and I still find stuff in my house, like photos of us together. And there were just like things that you have to like continually kind of like have show up and just get through. But I think as a leader for me, I wanted our team to see that this was not going to totally wreck us, because I just wasn't going to allow it. My father-in-law always says, like, Krista just wills it to work. And I think that's a big thing about women in business, is like, we just have this like resilience and this will to be like, no, this is going to work and we're going to get through this. And so during those times, I allowed myself to feel it. And then I also did a lot of internal work. Like, I showed up with my therapist more consistently. I got myself a coach to really focus time on me. And it wasn't a business coach at the time. I was like, I actually need to show up for me right now. And so I started to really put those things into play. And then throughout that, just really started to have conversations with the team and just transition us back into, what's this going to look like now? And we restructured things. We set up new processes. People kind of fell into new roles, such as myself, right? Like I took on some tasks that I wasn't previously having to take on. We had some hard conversations with clients who, were led by her. And ultimately, it's just like, I just kept powering through to the next thing. It's like, you just take one step at a time and eventually you're kind of there, right? And so that's kind of where I felt like we're just going to see how this goes day by day, step by step. I also, at the same time, was losing our project manager, who I mentioned earlier. She was taking on a new role. And so they were transitioning out at the same time. So it was a big team shift and a lot of things happening internally. And I also made sure to show up and ask my team, like, hey, are you okay? Like, how are you feeling about this? We do team building every single month. And so I had someone come in and do a vision session with us. And then the next month we did yoga. And I kind of just allowed the space to be open for people to share, like, if they were having a hard time. I think ultimately I was having the hardest time, right, of anybody. And so we managed to kind of like weather that storm. And from a profit perspective and a numbers perspective, they were our largest client as well. And so I made a focus of really getting client intake. And I think it always works out this way. And it's kind of funny. My husband and I were talking about this. Like when you let something go, right? Like you're just like, I'm willingly going to let that go. That was not meant for me. And yeah, this fucking sucks, but we're going to continue on. It's kind of funny how quickly what was meant for you does circle around. And that continues to be true for my business. And so, that happened. And I thought at the time, I was like, this is like the worst thing that's ever happened to me, right? Outside of like losing family members. And once I stepped outside of it, I was able to see like, you know what? Actually, this like wasn't such a bad thing. And we grew a lot from it. And I think it ultimately, not only for myself, but for her, was like the best thing that we needed to move forward and kind of make some choices. My best friend said, it was like a couple weeks after, she was like, we're just gonna, and I'm like big in my faith. And she was like, we're gonna say a prayer and like say like, thank you, Lord, for blessing her, please bless me next. And I remember her saying that. And I looked at her and I was like, no. I was like, no, we're not. I'm not saying that. I was like, I just can't get down with that prayer right now. And I appreciate you bringing that to me, but I can't. and I never thought I was going to be able to get to that place. And then, a couple months out, I was like, I went back to her and I was like, okay, we can say that prayer now. Yeah, I'm down.
Yeah, I mean, the anger, I mean, I think it's so real to see, because it is kind of like a breakup. And I'm sure like, as a listener, you may not have had a business partner break up like that, but some of us have, where we've had businesses not work out and it's super uncomfortable or sad or there's grief. We've all been in relationships that haven't worked out, or you have family members where there's tension and loss and stuff. And I think what's so interesting as you're talking is like this parallel between the grit required in motherhood to kind of pick back up and go like, this is the hardest fucking thing I've ever had to encounter, but there's no stopping. Like there's no giving up. There's no other way out but through. And the resilience that comes, I believe, like just in becoming a mother, like pure just becoming a mother, no matter how you have become a mother or how you are navigating motherhood, there is an additional level of resilience built into us because there's this new, level of, depth in our lived experience to know motherhood. And I feel like in these moments where something happens, whether it's in our business or in our relationship or in the world or with our family or whatever, you can kind of draw on that strength to go, like you said, like, I'm just going to will it to work out. And that doesn't mean that I'm going to make it not hurt. There's no way around it. But I'm not going to give up and I'm not going to make it this big victim thing, right? Like I have my moments of feeling angry and being the victim, and that's real, but I'm not going to live in the victimhood of this happened to me and there's no other way to handle it other than to just be the victim. Like, that's not how we approach motherhood, right? Right? Like motherhood's fucking hard and motherhood sucks sometimes and it's really painful and it's also beautiful and meant to be a certain way to teach us what we need to teach. And when we come through those hard moments, we always come through into something beautiful, right? I think it's just such a related, gritty story that you've been through and I don't think it's any accident. It happened like right as you were getting pregnant with your third child to go, hey, like here is a huge opportunity for you to practice what's needing to be practiced in your life, to say, this isn't an alignment. This is something really hard I have to go through. And it's also opening a door, like you're talking about, to let the stuff that you are magnetized for come in, but you had to clear that space out. And I don't know, I just think that's such a relatable story for a lot of mothers to be like, there's been so much hard stuff that has come along and I had no choice other than to experience it and to figure it out and to lead through it. And on the other side is this beautiful thing that I never thought in the moment, I didn't think it was worth it. In the moment it sucked. In the moment I hated it. But now on the other side of it, it's like, okay, yes, absolutely. That needed to happen. And I'm grateful that it did. I just love that arc of stories for us as mothers, because it happens to all of us. And a lot of us don't talk about it. It's like, we don't share. It would be so easy for you to be like, oh yeah. And my business partner left the business. I had to restructure, blah, 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 and just gloss over it. But that's not like, it doesn't get at what you learned and what makes you an incredible leader and an incredible mother because you've been through those experiences. So yeah, as you're talking, I'm like, that idea of like willing it to work and building the resilience muscle through those type of experiences is such a leader of a business thing. And it's also such a mother thing.
Such a mother thing. The funny thing is like my sister-in-law's just had her first baby and it takes you back, right? Like your first baby is such a different experience. Like it's just like a shock to the system and you are like, your life kind of like blows up, right? And so it's funny because she's kind of like going through this again and I get to watch her and I love it. And it's also, you see the resilience starting to build, right? And I think like we all have a sense of resilience, but then like mothers, as you become like a first-time mom, you're just like, whoa, it's like nothing I've ever experienced before. And like we've talked about, it is that sense of, I kind of don't have a choice other than to feel this and to get through this. And we are just accepting of that. And I think motherhood for me, I became a mom pretty early. I had my first little one at 23. And so motherhood for me totally transformed me as a leader. Like I definitely wouldn't be the same leader I am today without being a mom.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it shows in how you've been able to grow and sustain success in a business that's competitive, that in a business where you've gone through team members that were really important, whether they left on their own volition or not, where you've had, a pandemic happen and the whole industry get turned upside down, like so many things. But I think it speaks to your ability to take that lived experience and really ask yourself the hard questions of like, I love to work, I'm ambitious, I want the company to work. I'm also a breadwinner. I need the company to work because I pay, the money I make is important to our family. And I'm going to pull on motherhood as a way to make me a better leader, not an excuse to say, this is why I'm not a good leader or why the business is failing, right? Like, I think that's another part of a takeaway from speaking with you and things I've learned from you is like, not that a lot of women make the excuse of, oh, motherhood is why my business isn't successful, but it is such a truth that motherhood is the biggest challenge that there ever will be to being able to sustain growth in a business. If you're the leader of that business, right? Like there is something every single day that you could treat as the reason why today you don't want to show up. And I think learning and watching people like you who are out there leading in this way, it's everything we've talked about, right? It's like you put boundaries in place so that you can sustain the growth. You put resilience into your own inner work so that you can sustain the growth. You build systems into your relationship and your home so that you can sustain the growth. And all of that is not because you're prioritizing work over motherhood. It's that you want to do both things well, and you're allowing them to cross-pollinate in how they teach you to do both things well. And I think you're just such a good example of that. And also you're so, in my experience, like so real about when that's really hard for you, and you share those stories really honestly. So I just really appreciate your candor and respect to how you've built your business, because it's one of few businesses I know that like you're at 7 figures and you work between like 9 and 3 and you prioritize picking your kids up at preschool, and you're being real that you're going to take a 2-week maternity leave most likely and be back into a little bit of work. And I think that's the real life of people like us is like, yeah, I get a lot done between 9 and 3, and I am going to have to be back to work at some level a couple weeks after having my child. But my daily life looks like I work between 9 and 3, and I can sustain a rapidly growing, really successful, healthy business. So yeah, thank you for sharing all of that and for modeling it for us. Because it's obviously not easy, and as you shared, like there's a lot of work you've had to do and a lot of tools you rely on to be able to, when you feel yourself getting out of alignment, to pull yourself back in. Well, before we sign off, I mean, we could keep talking about this stuff, and we didn't even get into like the whole creative industry, which is a topic for another day, but I know you have such a finger on the pulse of social media and creating. And so if you're listening and you're somebody who is running a business and needs support with like creative work, marketing, social media, Krista and her agency are incredible. And you just have so much knowledge. So before we sign off, can you share where people can find you, especially for conversations around things like what's happening in the creative space and how to get support if you're someone who's like, I don't know what to do, I need help?
Yeah, no, totally. So our Instagram handle is studiowestdesign.co. And that's where we'll show up as a team in a full way to share like everything that's happening within the, business space and the social space and some updates and things like that. I have my personal Instagram, which you can also find, like I'm tagged in our Studio West platform. It is private just because I share so much about our kids. But that space, like if you're looking for some real like motherhood business owner talk, I do share a lot of like my personal stuff in that space. So feel free to give me a follow there as well. But I'm working to transition more of that conversation into, the agency social and, bringing these conversations to light, because a lot of us don't talk about it. And I think it's something that, even when we, like I was saying, we show up, with a very clear boundary with our clients, like we don't even really mention why. It's kind of just like, this is how we do it. And on the back end, it's like, this is how we do it because I'm a mom. And half my team are moms. And I have such a dire need for women who do want to work, and want to go back and know that that's their passion, to know that you can do it all. You can do both. It doesn't have to be one or the other. I'm a business owner and I'm a mother, or I'm a hard worker and I'm a mother. And each piece of that for me makes me better at the other side of the coin,
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. That's like the thesis of Motherhood too. You can do both things well. And if you're really intentional about it, doing one or the other well will improve the other, because it's going to show you your blind spots and it's going to show you where you need to do work. And it's also going to make you appreciate the other one more, So, well, thank you again for being here. I really, really appreciate your candor and your honesty. You're welcome. And thank you all for listening. And I'll see you on a future episode.